Settlements of the North American continent began at least 15,000 years ago, after the ocean level had dropped to expose a landmass beneath the modern-day Bering Strait. This exposed a land bridge that enabled the humans to migrate through Siberia to Alaska. Over the next several thousand years, the descendants of these people developed unique societies across North America with complex political, economic, religious systems and lifeways adapted to political local environments. You might read somewhere that Christopher Columbus was the first one to discover America. But no, that's not true because in 1965, archaeologists discovered conclusive proof that the Vikings arrived 500 years before Columbus. They found the ancient Viking settlement in Newfoundland, aka Vinland or Winland. Now back to Columbus. In October 1492, Columbus landed in the Central America on a ship called the Pinta. But at first, he thought that land was India. Anyways, his discovery also the beginning of exploring and conquering the new world of other European countries. Several wars broke out, and finally, with the help of the Native Americans, the English won and established the 13 colonies. Although England was victorious, the country was faced with a huge financial debt. Responding to the widely held view that America was largely to blame for the increase in the national debt, England was now looking toward America as the solution to the problem.
The British decided to take American colonies to pay the debt for the French and Indian War. Some famous acts of Great Britain in this time could be easily named are Sugar Act, Currency Act, Quarantine Act, Stamp Act, Tea Act, and moreover, Intolerable Act. The Boston Tea Party in 1773 is indeed one of the most famous protests that were meant to fight against the British strict regulation on its 13 colonies. The event took place on December 16, 1773 in Boston, province of Massachusetts Bay. This protest is led by a group called Sons of Liberty. The cause of this protest is the Tea Act, which was the final straw in a series of unpopular policies and taxes imposed by Britain on their American colonies. With the famous saying, "No taxation without representation," the colonists object to the Tea Act because they believed that it violated their rights and they wanted to be taxed only by their own elected representatives, not by a British parliament in which they were not represented. What they did was to throw tea into the Boston Harbor. Their action later on has been mentioned in the Intolerable Acts, in which no law was made to punish the colony's citizens. All of those strict and hard regulations are the catalyst for the birth of the United States of America. On June 11, 1776, the Congress appointed a committee of 5 consisting of John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman to draft a declaration. In the Second Continental Congress on July 4, 1776, 30 North American British colonies was announced to be separated from Great Britain. Until now, the 4th of July had always been celebrated in the United States as the Great National Holiday or the Independence Day. Thomas Jefferson, the principal authors of the Declaration, and the pictures of that day are printed on both sides of the $2 bill, the so-called Lucky Bill, which is being given widely as the Bill of Luck. So, this is the end of the American Revolution.
Hey, you missed something.
What?
This man.
Oh yeah, sorry. George Washington, the founding father of the United States. He is the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War. He is also famous for his ability to keep the struggling colonial army together. In 1789, Washington became America's first president.
By the middle of the 19th century, the U.S. territory consisted of 36 states divided into two distinct regions. Southern states are largely agrarian and have slavery, while northern states are industrial and abolitionist. Both sides wished to extend the model to the new western states, thus causing a gap between them to widen. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln won election as the first Republican president, pledging to keep slavery out of the territories. In response, 11 southern states seceded from the United States and banded together to proclaim the Confederate States of America. The Civil War between the Unionists of the North against the Confederates of the South lasted 4 years and ended when the Confederates surrendered in 1865. The Union's victory put an end to the Confederacy in the United States, thus enhanced the role of the federal government. However, the remnant of the Confederate forces was still there and organized the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln on April 14, 1865 in revenge. Slavery was abolished. Black people would soon be given citizenship and the right to vote. Families were reunited, and decades of suffering for millions of black people finally came to an end. Yet, the fighting has continued up to this day to end discrimination and in favor of equality. Even today, the consequences of this war still have repercussions on the United States of America. In another aspect, to accelerate its conquest to the West, the U.S. first transcontinental railway was built between 1863 and 1869 to join the eastern and western half of the United States. In the center of the country, the invention of new machinery allows intensive agriculture. Thus, plantation of wheat, corn, and large pastures were developed in the West. On the other hand, the rich soil in the East allowed rapid development of industry. In 1890s to 1920s, the third immigration of more than 23 million people, mostly European, came to the United States. Cheap labor created an abundant working force in the country. Also, in this time, some groups of industrialists become rich quickly by creating monopolies in sectors such as railways, banks, oil, steel, and exploiting labor in harsh conditions. Strikes and protests occurred but soon were repressed by private militaries. While Europeans' colonization occupied a large part of the world, the Americans also thought, maybe we could make all of those not America parts like America, but without rights and stuff.
What?
Seeing there was a revolt against the Spanish in Cuba, under the cover of supporting Cuban independence, the U.S. backed the revolts upon entering the Spanish-American War in 1898. The United States won, obtained the independence of Cuba, and seized Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The country hence became a colonial power. The American imperialism phrase appeared.
When World War I broke out across Europe in 1914, the United States proclaimed it would remain neutral. During that time, the U.S. has been selling supplies to the Allies throughout the world and getting super rich off the back of it. The Germans felt threatened by the U.S., so they sent a telegram to Mexico saying, "Wouldn't it be crazy cool if we attacked America?" But the British intercepted the message, showed it to Americans, and that was the last straw. American troops began shipping out in larger numbers to Europe. The Allies launched a counterattack. On November 11, 1918, at 11 o'clock, Germany surrendered. The war concluded with a victory for the Allies. In this war, more than 2 million U.S. troops have served at the Western Front in Europe, and more than 50,000 of them died. After 4 years of conflict, the First World War is finally over. America was one of the victors, and its both entered a period of economic prosperity and cultural change known as the Roaring Twenties. Things was pretty smooth at first. more jobs, more salaries to spend, and tons of inventions. Soon, people started to look for things to do with their newfound wealth, like investing in stock market. But the stocks were rising so fast that companies were having a hard time keeping up and justifying their stock price. October 24 and October 29, 1929, or Black Thursday and Black Tuesday as they were called. Millions of shares end up worthless. People have lost their life savings, and Americans who borrow to invest are absolutely crushed. So here we are, the Great Depression, the worst economic downturn in the history of the industrialized world. Even when the economy started to pick up again in 1938, the repercussions of the Great Depression lingered until the early 1940s, after the second economic downturn. During the Second World War, as the European situation became tense, the United States continued to hold up its isolationist policy. But the Japanese thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy the US navies before we begin our conquest? On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attacked the Pearl Harbor, inflicted a huge amount of damage, and declared war with the US. The sleeping giant has been awoken. The major combat operations for the US Army began in 1942. On June 6, 1944, the Germans, British, and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped a German 7th Army in a near whiteout encircling movement. After being driven back, the Germans' remaining troops completely collapsed. Berlin fell. Hitler's imperialistic goals were unfulfilled. On August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima, Japan. On August 9, the second bomb exploded over the city of Nagasaki. The cities were reduced to rubble. And for the people living there, it was a terrible fate. On September 9, the Emperor made the announcement that Japan had surrendered. The Second World War came to an end. In the Second World War, 10 million soldiers served in the US Army. 235,000 were killed and 592,000 wounded.
During the second half of the 20th century, the world's two major powers were engaged in a face-off without direct confrontation for almost 45 years. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yes, the Cold War between the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. At the end of the World War II, both powers tried to peddle their influence in Europe. Europe is divided into two blocks and separated by what is called the Iron Curtain. Beyond ideology and clout, the two power paddles were influenced in the fields of science, industry, space, sport, and military. The Soviets were one step ahead, launching the first man into space in 1961, but the Americans won for being the first to step on the moon on July 20, 1969. Came back to 1949 when the Soviets detonated their own atom bomb. In response, President Truman announced that the United States would build more destructive atom weapons. A deathly arms race began. The Cold War was a constant presence in Americans' everyday life as people built a bomb settled in their backyard. They practiced attack drill in school and other public places. In this race, with the Soviets invest up 14% in this coordination product on the cost, they began to run out of money. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall, the iconic symbol of the decade-long Cold War, was finally destroyed. By 1991, the Soviet Union itself had fallen apart, marking the end of the Cold War. The Vietnam War was a well-known event to every Vietnamese. Now here are America's odds. Anti-Vietnam War demonstrations in the United States began in 1964 and grew up a large social movement and persisted for several years. In 1960 and the early 1970s, in the U.S. were characterized by a serious and divided debate on how to stop the conflict. The U.S. plane first began bombing North Vietnam in February 1965, and then there were demonstrations more and more. Typically, a group of Berkeley University students marched on the Berkeley Airport on May 5th. On November 2nd, in 1965, 32-year-old worker Norman Morrison set himself on fire in front of the Pentagon, which later on became a total the inspiration on his poem, Emily Child. On November 9th, 22-year-old Catholic worker movement members did the same in front of the United Nations headquarters in the New York City. There are just a few typical demonstrations in many demonstrations in the Americas, while severe pressure from the public, as well as the terrible setback in Vietnam's war. On January 23, 1973, President Nixon addressed the nation and announced that the conclusion of an agreement on ending the war and restore peace in Vietnam has been reached.
To end the war and bring peace with honor in Vietnam.
The 21st century in the United States has witnessed many events that went down to history. First, the Great Recession in 2008. The Great Recession officially lasted from December 2007 to June 2009. The economic crisis in the United States has been linked to the so-called subprime market crisis. The economic slump began when the U.S. housing market went from boom to bust, and large amounts of market-backed securities and derivatives lost significant value. On December 1, 2008, the National Bureau of Economic Research declared that the United States entered the recession. The stock market crashed. The American household lost roughly $19 trillion of net worth as a result of the stock market plunge. The country shed more than 8.7 million jobs, causing the unemployment rate to double. In response to the recession, the government made many efforts to stabilize the economy. In the context of the Great Recession, on November 4, 2008, Barack Obama won the election for the 44th President of the USA, becoming the first African-American president in the history of the nation. He carried out the mission of restoring the economy's growth and ending a year-long U.S. recession after his inauguration. In this century, the USA took part in two wars, the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. The U.S. war in Iraq started in 2003 and ended in 2011. The main reason for this war is to destroy Iraqi weapons of mass destruction and end the dictatorial rule of Saddam Hussein. The costs of the conflict were high. Next, the Afghanistan War, which is the United States' longest war, began in 1999 and ended in 2021. In this war, the United States suffered from one of the most terrible tragedies, the September 11 attacks. On September 11, 2001, Islamic terrorists hijacked 4 U.S. airliners and crashed them into the Pentagon and the World Trade Center in New York City. The attack of 2 planes leveled the World Trade Center, and the crash of one plane inflicted serious damage to the Pentagon in Virginia, causing nearly 3,000 deaths. One interesting and mysterious thing about this tragedy is that the September 11 attacks were believed to be predicted by the Bulgarian blind mystic Baba Vanga. In 1989, she said,
Horror, horror. The American brother will fall after being attacked by the steel bird. The wolf will be howling in the bush, and innocent blood will be gushing.
One of the turning points in this war is that on May 1, 2011, the Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, who was the mastermind behind the September 11 attacks, was killed by the US forces in Pakistan. It was not until April 14, 2021, that the newly elected President Joe Biden released a plan for a full troop withdrawal by September 11, 2021. He said,
I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home.